One day there might be 100 of these movies to rank. What's going on, guys? I'm Chris and welcome back to another video. So today I'm giving you my MCU ranking, but this is not going to be the normal MCU ranking. I'm going to do this one in about 10 minutes or less. I'm not going to talk as much about these movies because I just did this video back in May when Multiverse of Madness came out. Before I get into this ranking, make sure to hit that like button, comment down below your thoughts on these movies and your ranking. Where does Thor Love and Thunder place, the newly released MCU movie? And make sure to subscribe to that notification bell so you don't miss any future ranking videos from Stranger Things to Marvel and all that good stuff. But without further ado, I'm going to get into this thing, and I'm going to be very abrupt with a lot of these because I've talked about them recently. But starting number 29, we got Thor: The Dark World, the most dreadful and boring to rewatch MCU movie by far. At number 28, we've got The Incredible Hulk, a movie that feels so disconnected from the MCU. A lot of people call it the black sheep of the MCU because it doesn't feel like it's a part of it. You've got a different Hulk actor, and it really doesn't have that charm of the MCU. Number 27 is Captain Marvel, another movie that feels early phase 1, has an awful reveal with the villain, and is just a very cheesy movie. The only saving grace of it is obviously Goose the Cat and Nick Fury's role because Samuel L. Jackson kills it here. Number 26 is going to be Ant-Man and the Wasp. This movie is essentially one long car chase scene, and that's alright because Paul Rudd is a lot of fun in it. There's some great chemistry between him and Wasp, but Ghost is a very lackluster villain that never did much for me. Number 25 for me is going to be Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, the second newly released MCU film that came out back in May. This movie's all over the place for me. It had some moments of brilliance, I thought, with Sam Raimi coming in to direct it. He had some really cool shots and aesthetics, but overall the story was all over the place. I'm not a fan of Wanda as a character and what they did with her, and they absolutely destroyed the Illuminati in this movie, which I was not a fan of. They crushed a lot of my dreams with that movie, and the whole multiverse realm wasn't conquered in a very fitting way. Very much a letdown in my opinion. Number 24 for me is going to be Thor Love and Thunder, which might be shocking to some of you. This is the newly released MCU movie. I know a lot of you guys love it. It's kind of a mixed bag. This movie's a complete joke to me. I'm over the Taika Waititi shtick where it feels like he's doing the same thing over and over, throwing jokes at the wall for 2 hours, and just making it almost not as enjoyable as it needs to be. This movie should have been much more serious, which is crazy because back in the day we used to say Thor movies are too serious. It's not very enjoyable on a rewatch. As good as Christian Bale is in the role as Gore the God Butcher, his time on screen is way too limited, and this movie is not very entertaining. Because the jokes fall flat so much, it almost feels like a chore to watch through. Number 23 for me is going to be Eternals, a movie that has a lot of great concepts, a lot of great new characters in the MCU, but it's trying to do way too much and introduce these grand concepts that kind of rewrite the history of the MCU that we know and love, and it just makes for a little bit of a convoluted mess. I would have loved more Dane Whitman in this movie. I can't wait to see some Black Knight. Richard Madden gives a great performance here, and there are great performances across the board, but overall there's way too many characters to get fully latched onto them or really feel any of the emotional weight this movie had, because the vision is there, but the actual final product kind of falls flat. Number 22 for me is going to be Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Now this movie is actually starting to creep its way up my ranking. If you followed me for a while, you know it's usually a little bit lower. I don't love the movie still. I think there's way too much going on in the first 30 minutes. It's jumping from different planet to different planet. But at its core, there is a pretty sweet family story. Peter Quill actually discovering that his father's a total a-hole, and his real father figure is Yondu. I'm Mary Poppins, y'all. That line never fails to kind of get the tears going. It's a pretty sweet movie. I think I've done a little too hard on it lately, and I definitely want to rewatch it soon before the holiday special and Guardians 3. But taking us into number 21 is going to be Iron Man 3. A lot of people love this movie. To me, it's always been a little weak. I've never been a fan of the whole Mandarin reveal. There's some cool action. It's kind of a Christmassy type movie. Other than that, Iron Man 3 is pretty forgettable. Number 20 for me is actually going to be Thor from 2011, one of the more underrated MCU movies by far. It's a lot of fun. If you watch the first 30 minutes, Thor's this cocky hotshot. He's taking on the Frost Giants, and we get a really epic action sequence. He then kind of has a nice arc throughout the film. We get introduced to Loki. There's a lot to love with this first Thor movie. It's not perfect by any means, but it's kind of got a phase 1 charm to it that is lacking in more recent MCU movies. Number 19 for me is going to be Iron Man 2, a movie that I have a ton of nostalgia for. I remember seeing this one in theaters. It's actually the first MCU movie I was able to see in theaters. I thought it was so cool watching the trailer for this on a loop before the movie. We got an awesome final act action scene when Rhodey and Iron Man team up to fight Whiplash and his bots. Justin Hammer being kind of an asshole villain throughout here. They plant the seeds for the Avengers movie in this as well, so there is a lot to love here. It is kind of a convoluted mess at times, but I have a soft spot for Tony Stark as a character, and I've kind of realized maybe I was just following the trend of putting Iron Man 2 a little bit lower because that's what the popular thing is to do, when in reality, I kind of like this movie more than most people, and that's totally okay. Number 18 for me is going to be Black Panther, another highly overrated MCU film. I think that I love the world of Wakanda, and that's definitely the coolest part of this movie, is seeing this new grand world with some really awesome visuals and a total kick-ass score by Ludwig Göransson, who deserved that Oscar. The costume designs are absolutely gorgeous, and just seeing this other side of the MCU was something that we don't see a lot. very cool to explore that. I think Killmonger's a little bit of an overrated villain, but he's still so understood. And overall, this movie had a huge impact on the MCU for the better. Number 17 for me is going to be Doctor Strange, a movie that I think is a really solid origin story with Stephen Strange. Episode 4 of What If really enhanced my actual care and compassion for Stephen Strange and his relationship with Dr. Christine Palmer, because it's really heartbreaking what happens to Stephen Strange, and that episode of What If kind of mirrors that arc he has in the relationship with her, so I can have a new lens of appreciation when I watch this movie. Kaecilius is a mad villain. The visuals in this movie are what I really am here to write home about because they are damn great. But coming in at number 16 for me is going to be Avengers Age of Ultron, a really fun MCU movie. I mean, I think this one gets the short end of the stick a lot. You've got Ultron as a really solid villain. This is one of the few times we actually see the Avengers feel like a family when they're hanging out at Clint's cabin. It's got really awesome action sequences. We're introduced to Wanda and Quicksilver. Lots to love in Avengers Age of Ultron. I feel like it kind of just gets thrown under the rug because it is clearly the weakest of the 4 Avengers movies, but that's not saying much because we got some of the best MCU movies overall with those. But number 15 for me is Black Widow, a movie that I have a big soft spot for. I thought it was a lot of fun, one of those MCU movies that we got to see in theaters after a 2-year gap pretty much. Black Widow is a character who deserved a solo movie way before this, and I'm glad she finally got her time to shine. We get introduced to Red Guardian and Yelena in this movie, who are 2 of my favorite new characters in Phase 4. It's a story about family at its core, and it really just makes me feel happy inside. It doesn't have great villains, but damn, is it kind of a feel-good movie in the end. Number 14 for me is Captain America: The First Avenger, a classic MCU movie. This is one of those early Phase 1 movies. You've got that awesome score, the direction from Joe Johnston just makes for a family fun time. It's a war film, and it's a great introduction to Captain America. The ending breaks my heart, but he ends up getting that final dance, so it all is fine in the end. Next for me, at number 13, is going to be Spider-Man: Far From Home. I think this is the most overhated MCU movie. People love to rag on this one, when in reality, it's a damn great Spider-Man movie to me. Mysterio, played by Jake Gyllenhaal wonderfully, is one of the better MCU villains because in reality, he actually wins. We see in Spider-Man No Way Home how much trauma and chaos he's caused for Peter Parker's life, and that's how you know he wins, because he might die in the end, but he gets the upper hand on Peter Parker ultimately. We get to see Spider-Man outside of New York City, some cool action sequences with the drones, and of course MJ and Peter's relationship might be the best it's ever been in this movie. I have a blast with Far From Home despite the hate. I always will enjoy this one. Number 12 for me is going to be Thor Ragnarok, which might be lower than some of you think it should be, but hey, it's just my 2 cents, right? This movie's a ton of fun. You got Hulk fighting Thor in the Gladiator match. Loki's the best he's ever been in the MCU here. Valkyrie's introduced and she kicks a lot of ass. And you've got a killer soundtrack, especially with Led Zeppelin's Immigrant Song. There's 2 moments in this movie where I get absolute chills. One of those being when Thor comes down on the bridge at the end, because that man is an absolute badass. But number 11 for me is going to be Ant-Man, one of the more underrated MCU movies, I would say. Yes, it's a heist movie in the MCU and Paul Rudd's doing his shtick, but damn is it a fun time. It's got a lot of heart to it. His relationship with his daughter Cassie really carries this movie. Yellow Jacket's a pretty solid MCU villain, and this is a movie that I definitely had no hopes for, but walked out of that theater, or should I say drove out of that theater, because I went to the drive-in to see this one, pleasantly surprised. Ant-Man is one of those easy-to-love characters in the MCU without a doubt. Now bringing us into the top 10 is going to be Spider-Man: Homecoming, a perfect coming-of-age story, and a damn great way to have Spider-Man have his own solo movie in the MCU. I stand by this. Vulture's a top 3 MCU villain. We throw that Morbius post-credit scene out the window. Let it be damned, because this movie on its own makes Vulture great. He's doing whatever he can to protect his family. We see Spider-Man having those teenager struggles in high school, which is what he is at his core. Just a kid trying to make it as a superhero, but also trying to impress the girls and make friends. He's a nerd at heart, and we see all those different elements in the character portrayed wonderfully by Tom Holland here. Number 9 for me is going to be Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. One of the more epic and fantastical entries in Phase 4, and what works about this movie compared to other Phase 4 movies is it introduces a new character in the MCU, but he's so easy to love. This dude's kicking ass in the first 20 minutes on a bus, the soundtrack slaps, and it's just fun. I feel like a lot of these recent MCU movies lack fun storytelling in a compelling way. Wen Wu is one of those villains we can really get behind and understand because he's literally Shang-Chi's father, and there's some bad blood between the 2 of them, but Shang-Chi is a great new addition to the MCU, and I cannot wait to see more of him. Number 8 for me is going to be the first Avengers, another classic MCU movie. The Battle of New York is something I will never forget seeing. Our heroes teaming up for the first time on the big screen. It did numbers at the box office for a reason. Number 7 for me is going to be Captain America: The Winter Soldier. I stand by this. This is probably the most overrated MCU movie, but damn, is it still great. The score slaps, and the direction by the Russo brothers makes for one of the most action-packed, entertaining, and stylistically cool MCU movies we've gotten to date. Cap vs. Bucky on the highway. Cap and Nat are a great duo, and Falcon's introduced in this movie. Lots to love with the Winter Soldier. But coming in at number 6 for me is going to be Guardians of the Galaxy. Probably the most fun MCU movie, just outright. You could watch this any time of day. It feels like a Star Wars space adventure. I love seeing a family come together against all odds and kick ass, and you really kind of have your heart warmed by the end of this movie when Groot makes that sacrifice. Guardians of the Galaxy is kind of a timeless MCU movie. I consider it to be a modern classic, and James Gunn really introduced himself to the MCU with a bang here, and I can't wait to see what he does with the third Guardians coming very soon. But bringing us into the top 5 is going to be Spider-Man No Way Home. Now, you're probably shocked. You might have just dropped your phone if you're watching this, because I've held this movie very high for a long time. It's still in my top 5. I still love it, but I've thought about it recently. Every time I go back and rewatch this movie, the first hour and 15 minutes kind of regress for me because I'm just waiting for Tobey and Andrew to show up. Because yes, they are in the movie and they help Tom Holland's arc. It's not just fan service, but when they're on screen, it's so fantastic that everything else just feels kind of meh. And if you go back and watch some of those scenes, they feel a little goofy, kind of cringe at times, which is unfortunate. It doesn't hold up as well in the first 2 acts, but that third act is some of the best superhero content we will ever see on the big screen, and I will stand by that. I still love Spider-Man No Way Home. We've just gotten about 6 months out from its release, and I've started to realize maybe it's not as perfect as I thought it was, but still a damn great movie and my favorite Spider-Man movie to date. But my number 4 movie is Iron Man, a movie I have so much love for, and I always tell this story when I talk about it. I have to. In the 4th grade, I had the DVD, and I would come home from school every day for like 2 weeks, pop in Iron Man, and then I would eat dinner after. It was my routine. I know this movie like the back of my hand. I think it's a perfect origin story, one of the best superhero origin stories of all time. Tony Stark / Iron Man is my guy, and he'll always be my favorite MCU character, and this is the one that started it all. I will always pay respect to it. No matter how grand this franchise gets, this is a grounded story that I will always love and have a special place in my heart for. But coming in at number 3 for me is going to be Captain America Civil War, a fantastic movie that portrays conflict better than any in the MCU. As I'm flip-flopping sides throughout this entire movie, I hate Cap's guts 1 second, I'm questioning Tony's mind at 1 second. Really well directed by the Russo brothers. We're introduced to Black Panther and Spider-Man in the MCU. We get some of the most kick-ass action from that airport battle to the final showdown between Cap, Bucky, and Iron Man. I literally get infuriated when I watch this movie. It is so well directed. The score slaps too. There's really few perfect superhero movies, and this is without a doubt one of them. But coming in at number 2, my runner-up is Avengers Endgame, the epic conclusion that in all reality probably should have ended the MCU. It perfectly concludes Cap's arc as he ends up getting a little bit of that life Tony always told him to have, but also we get to see Tony make the ultimate sacrifice. Starting out as that selfish hotshot who's kind of cocky, he ends up making the sacrifice play that Cap said he never had in him to do. This is a perfect way to wrap up your franchise. The 3-act structure is perfection. No matter what, I could watch that final hour any hour of the day. The king of my MCU ranking is Avengers Infinity War. I think this is probably one of the best superhero movies ever made. I could rewatch this just about any day of the week because it flies by so much. The way the Russo brothers and Feige are able to handle so many characters around different portions of the galaxy, essentially, in an effective way is honestly impressive. Thanos is the best MCU villain, and this is his movie to shine. He wins. It's one of the few superhero movies / MCU movies where our hero wins, and that could have been that. Could have ended really dark, and the MCU could have never continued. There's multiple moments where I cheer in this movie. I get really emotional. I'm terrified. I feel like we have no hope, and that's how I know it's a great setup to Avengers Endgame, because this is a movie that makes me feel all different ranges of emotions. The villain wins, and it's still epic as hell in the end, and highly rewatchable. But that's going to do it for my quick MCU update ranking of all 29 movies. What is your ranking? Let me know in the comments down below. Make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, hit that notification bell. I might have a few more MCU videos coming out very soon. What do you think of Thor Love and Thunder? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Are you a mixed bag? Check out my review. I'll link it up above. I did also a spoiler review with my great friend Trevor from Film Geeks. Go subscribe to him. He's killing it with the content right now. But thank you guys again for watching, and until next time, see you guys later.